We say we want children to grow to be self-responsible, creative, problem-solving adults. But in schooling kids, do we follow through on that? Now, here's a positive example of adult creative problem-solving. Dr. Barry Marshall, he suspected that a bacterium caused stomach ulcers, but he was merely a junior faculty researcher in faraway Western Australia. And at that time, the world's medical establishment believed strongly that ulcers were caused by acids from poor diets or stress. Now, Dr. Marshall likes to quote historian Daniel Boorstin, quote, "The greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge," unquote. So Barry Marshall's eccentric hypothesis met with some resistance, and he realized very quickly that his prospects for getting a research grant for it were non-existent. So what was his solution? Well, just do a human experiment. But then an additional problem. Who on earth is ever going to let him give this suspected bacterium to his patients or to medical students or anyone for that matter? So again, there's no chance of doing the experiment in standard experimental fashion. So without letting anyone except his lab technicians know, Dr. Marshall extracted H. pylori, this was the suspected bacterium, from a patient who was suffering from gastric ulceration, and he drank down an entire petri dish full of it. As expected and hoped, Dr. Marshall experienced 2 weeks of vomiting, halitosis, and appetite loss. But 2 endoscopies confirmed his ulcerous infection and the damage to his stomach mucosa. "So, great experiment," he exulted later, and this was on his way to winning the 2005 Nobel Prize in Medicine as the co-discoverer that the bacterium H. pylori causes stomach ulcers. And just on the side, of course, a course of antibiotics had also quickly solved his self-induced ulcer problems. Now, that's a great story. But let's go back to school and keep in mind Barry Marshall's adult mindset and his proactive Just Do It initiative. Now, we say when we talk about education in schools, education is to prepare one for life. Life is complex with some constants but much change. We know a lot, but we also know that there's a huge amount yet to learn, and likely there's very much to unlearn. So for the first, say, 16 years of children's lives, how do we develop the knowledge and the habits and the skills that kids need to handle the adult complexities of life? Well, mostly we send them to school. So imagine school. Form an image in your mind. What comes into your imagination at that point? Now, if you're like me, you're thinking about rows of desks. Now, there are, of course, experimental schools, but even in the 21st century, around the world, classrooms all look pretty much the same. And students sit in those rows of desks. And what do while they are sitting there? They listen to the teacher, or they read a textbook, and they do what the teacher or the book says. They do that for 6 or 7 hours a day. If they need to go to the bathroom, they raise a hand and they ask for permission. Now, keep that image of school in mind, that stereotypical image, and we will come back to it. Now, I want to tell you a couple of more short stories. I regularly teach medical ethics and education, so you might notice some common themes in this story. First, I want to go back to 1492, and that was the year that Lorenzo the Magnificent died. He died young. He was the 3rd generation of the wealthy Medici banking family. He was a major political player and a patron of the arts. He sponsored Michelangelo, Raphael, and dozens of others. Yet when only 43 years old, he fell seriously ill. Now, of course, the best physicians were brought in, and his highly schooled doctors realized that they had to apply the best medicine based on the best theory and fast. So, for Lorenzo, a special potion was prepared, and its major ingredients were ground pearls and diamonds. And here's the theory. Pearls and diamonds are the most expensive and excellent of jewels, and Lorenzo is the most wealthy and excellent of men, so there's a natural fit. The potion was administered. The next morning, Lorenzo was dead. Now, nowadays, we laugh at the medical ideas of Lorenzo's physicians, but they were not being radicals. Weren't they just being good students in doing what their teachers and their textbooks told them to do? Now, we know that progress requires independent thinkers who are willing to question authority, to challenge it. Now, question authority doesn't necessarily mean disagree with authority, though, of course, disagreements are going to be inevitable when we've got active-minded, independent thinkers. But now, as in Lorenzo's time, many theories are likely wrong, right? Barry Marshall, toward the end of the 20th century, just this last generation, he was taught a false medical theory, just as Lorenzo's physicians were taught a false medical theory. So what kind of schooling is going to encourage the needed critical challenging and not just follow the leader, read the textbook, and do what it says? Now, I want to say not only physicians, but politicians desperately need that kind of schooling. Another anecdote going back this time to 1665. Plague was sweeping the city of London in the summer of 1665, and the Lord Mayor of London was desperate to do something. They called it the Black Death, black because of the color of the nasty lumps that signaled the Black Death's presence in the victim's body, and death because of the invariable results. Now, as a matter of fact, we know this, the plague's germs were carried by fleas that lived as parasites on rats. But that was not known in 1665. By mid-July, fear had gripped the city. Plague was killing over 1,000 Londoners every single week. Now, medical progress had made progress, a lot of progress, since Lorenzo de' Medici had died, 175 years earlier. But then a rumor spread through the city of London that the cause of the plague was cats and dogs. Cats and dogs, those dirty animals, were spreading the disease. So the Lord Mayor of London, desperate to do something, he ordered that all of the cats and dogs be killed. And he offered a reward for every dog or cat that was brought in by killers of those animals. And then subsequently, a wave of cats and dogs were killed, and an estimated 200,000 cats were killed, and about 40,000 dogs were then destroyed on political order. Yet the actual effect of the mayor's policy was to reduce the number of natural enemies of the rats that were actually carrying the fleas that carried the germs. So the plague spread even more quickly. So in this case, we have a very clear historical example of fear combined with ignorance and leveraged by political power that made a bad problem worse. Now, once again, here we are, 21st century. We will laugh, maybe a little bitterly at the Lord Mayor's ignorance and his fear-based decision. But think about our own generation's politicians. How confident are we that they have received better schooling in science and better schooling in making judgments under scientific uncertainty and avoid just do something impulsiveness? So let's return to our standard image of school, the one we imagined it a little earlier. Students all sitting in rows, they're all doing what the teacher says. Everyone's learning to do the same thing. They're all doing it at the same time. They're supposed to be using the same methods and getting the same answer that's already written down in the textbook. They learn they need to pass the test, and they had better not fail the test. And if they want to get up and move around, they need to ask permission from the authorities. Now here's the question. What will be the end product of years and years of that kind of schooling? We also know that all of us, not only physicians of Lorenzo de' Medici or politicians like the Lord Mayor of London, of course some of us will go on to be physicians and politicians, but all of us need to encourage ourselves to develop our creative imagination. That's the sort of thing that leads to innovation. That's the sort of things that leads us to question and challenge and discover the currently prevailing false beliefs. And we also need to develop the courage to be able to challenge the authorities who are currently in place. We also know that trial and error and a lot of persistence and at least occasional challenges to the status quo are going to be needed to make progress. So my fear is that we have a big conflict between our professed aspirations for education and the reality of much mainstream schooling. So here are the kinds of questions I think we can ask. Do schools, in fact, teach independence of mind and action? Or is the lesson that students get is compliance? They need to learn to do what the teachers tell them, and then in return, when tested, to tell the teachers what the teachers want to hear and to ask permission. So are we getting independent students or compliant students? Do students learn that life is about solving new problems? Or do they learn that the authorities, the teacher and the textbooks, have the answers? Do students learn experimentalism and that success typically is coming after much failure and that they should embrace failure? Or do they learn the lesson that failure is a source of shame and they should fear telling their parents that they have failed a series of times? Is the school day about becoming absorbed in tasks and persevering until you succeed? Or is the prevailing attitude kind of clock watching and maybe even cheating to get rid of unwanted imposed assignments? Are students praised consistently and encouraged about asking offbeat questions and wanting to set their own schedules and to cultivate their own independent styles? Or do they worry about contradicting the teacher? Do they learn to follow the dress code and to stay in their assigned seats until they are allowed to leave? Now, we are a rich and innovative society. We have countless of examples of inspiring individuals, Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, dozens and dozens of others who did not fit the school system, but nonetheless found a way to fulfill their human potential. But we still persist in demanding that each new generation of children conform themselves to a school system that we ourselves imagine. That's still the stereotype that we have in our heads. And we usually know it from firsthand experience to be regimented, vaguely dehumanizing, and for most kids, deathly boring. Why do we persist in that? We have the experience, we have the resources to reschool ourselves about what education can and should be. Now, partly, I think, as some necessary steps, we need to reconceptualize all of the elements of education, right? What does it take to be a teacher? What kind of people do we want to hire to be teachers? Do we want, as teachers, students, or former students who sat well, did their homework, got the pats on the head, or nicely certified? Or, just to choose a stereotypical example, do we want a person who's now in his or her late 20s, but dropped out of high school, started a rock band, went off to Asia to find himself or herself, came back home, started a business but failed, and now wants to be a teacher? What kind of person? That's two stereotypes, but that's what we need to be thinking about. Thinking about the physical surroundings of the classrooms and the entire school building. Do we really want rows of desks, regimented, assigned seatings, and so on? The content of the curriculum, where we spend most of our time debating, but even the delivery methods, how we assess success, failure. And I want to turn now just to one element of this mix, and that's homework. And I want to focus just on this one for the rest of this podcast, partly because it's a bit of a pet peeve for me over the course of my lifetime. But there also is a principled set of issues about education and schooling that speaks exactly to my theme today, as the way that homework is traditionally done is a continuing cause of child semi-dehumanization, and it just instills and causes reactions of passive resistance, evasion, and outright rebellion. And anything that takes normal, healthy kids and makes them feel semi-dehumanized, causes widespread resistance, evasion, and rebellion, we should take that as a red flag that it's not something wrong with the kids, there's something wrong with what we are doing. And the problem with homework as traditionally conceived is that it just extends a mostly authoritarian, maybe a benevolent authoritarian, but nonetheless authoritarian education system into the home. So if we take a step back, we say about educating a child for adult life. Well, that's a huge, vast philosophical project. How does one become a fully functional adult with a zest for all that life has to offer? How does one acquire the knowledge, the skills, the habits to pursue it? Now, homework, traditionally conceived, is not part of the answer to that. And when we consider the sadly large number of people, young people who are tuned out, dropped out, or more kind of actively rebelling against their formal schooling, homework, I think, is often a major culprit, and it is a symptom. So one way to think about it is this: time management. A day has 24 hours. Kids, they need 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night. They need, say, an hour for eating meals, another hour for dressing, undressing, bathroom time, an hour or two maybe for helping around the house, picking up and cleaning, taking out the trash, raking leaves, shoveling snow, weeding the garden, sorting laundry, and so on. Now, the school day, including travel to and fro, on average is another 7 to 8 hours. Now, if you put all of that together, what's left over in the kid's day? It's about 6 hours. Now, into that 6 hours, we want kids to have time for themselves, playtime with their friends, time for family activities. We want them to do sports, music lessons, to ride their bikes, to go sledding, to read books for interest, to pursue their hobbies, to watch television, and of course to play video games. So we do face a time trade-off. And it's a value trade-off about the best use of that time, the value of homework against the value of those other activities. But I think when school has already been 7 or 8 hours, those other activities should count for more. Now, of course, from homework's advocates, we hear, but education is important. Well, of course, education is important. But formal schooling is not the only source of education. Kids learn much from sports, games, television, over family dinners, and those other life activities are also important in their own right. Refer to, for example, there's a piece, I'll put this in the links, that even watching television dramas, now, the amount of TV time, of course, it can be overdone, just like anything can be overdone. But watching television drama can be beneficial to kids in lots of ways, inspiring certain sorts of careers, exposing students to different kinds of people and personalities and situations, and excruciating, in some cases, moral choices. But then, of course, homework's advocates persist. There's not enough time in the school day to get everything done. Well, there's not enough time usually in anyone's day to get everything done. And one of life's lessons should be to set realistic expectations given various time and other constraints. So if we've decided schooling is going to be 6 or 7 or 8 hours, then your professional responsibility as an educator is to get done what you need to get done in that amount of time, not to spill it over into other life activities. But sometimes homework advocates will also say, we want to get parents involved, and we want to show parents how committed we are to their children's education. Now, of course, that's a noble purpose as well, but that's one that can be achieved by progress reports, regular parent-teacher conferences, and actually using the 6, 7, or 8 hours a day that you have the kids under your charge, getting a lot done, accomplishing a lot in that classroom time. But all of that time management stuff aside, I think the biggest argument against traditional homework is actually about moral philosophy and political philosophy. And the reason is this, that traditional homework teaches children that what they do and when they will do it is decided by other people. But by contrast, becoming a complete human being means learning how to set our own important goals and how to achieve them. By the time we are adults, we choose our careers and how much time we're going to spend on them. We choose our friends and our romantic partners and how much time we're going to spend with them. We choose our leisure activities, whether to have children ourselves, and so on and so on. To put the point negatively, adult life is not about others deciding those things for us, nor is it about others telling us when and how to do them. Of course, other smart and caring people can assist us with making these choices, giving us resources, giving us advice. But all of education, including formal schooling, should model and it should practice the overall arching purpose of achieving independence in life. Children need to learn that they are the authors of their adult lives and the ways to do that well. Traditional homework, by contrast, is an extension of a different concept of formal schooling. It's one in which teachers and administrators are the authors who decide what will be taught, when it will be scheduled, and what the right answers are. From this perspective, children arrive at school wherein their day is scripted. The bell rings, the teacher speaks, and the students follow instructions, typically in one-size-fits-all fashion, as all students are, again, doing the same thing at the same time in the same way. Then the bell rings, and the pattern is repeated. And what homework does is extend the control of school further into the child's life. You will do these problems, and you will complete that project. And at home, when children are reluctant to do the work that the teachers have assigned to them, parents are expected to step in and become the enforcers. So the issue is not simply about judgment call trade-offs about how to allocate scarce time and time resources. Homework is a contested practice in education, and it's often a battleground at home because it is embedded in an authoritarian context. No mentally healthy person, and especially no mentally healthy child, likes to be ordered around. I'm reminded of a line from the philosopher John Locke, whose writings on education did much to transition us from traditional authoritarian education to modern liberal education. But the point is that this is over 300 years ago that John Locke is writing this. And notice the concept of play, liberty, experimentation, and against authoritarian impositions. Quote, "Great care is to be taken that education be never made as a business to him, nor he look upon it as a task. We naturally, even from our cradles, love liberty, and therefore have an aversion to many other things, for no other reason but because they are enjoined us. I have always had a fancy that learning might be made a play and a recreation to children, that they might be brought to desire to be taught if it were proposed to them as a thing of honor, credit, delight, and recreation." Unquote. That's again from the 1690s, over 3 centuries ago, and we still need to take Locke's lesson more to heart. Now, education, of course, is preparation for life. We might even more strongly say that education is life. And we find, of course, that adult work life exhibits the same contrast between the freely chosen and the authoritarian. So one of the reasons why we have these huge contests about what formal schooling should look like and whether homework should be extended to the home is that people have very different conceptions of what adult life is, and it should be what we're trying to prepare students for. So consider those at one end of the spectrum, those who work in careers that they've chosen and for whom their work projects are kind of personal commitments that they have freely made. They feel a deep integrity and a deep investment in their careers. Now, compare those at the other end of the spectrum, those sad cases who feel that they have to work, that they're working as a matter of duty, and that their work life is a matter of following orders from the boss. When we work because we have chosen it and we like it, we find plenty of energy for it. We also find ourselves wanting to work outside of our formal working hours, that is to say, to do our homework. But when our jobs feel like an imposition on our lives, then we become demotivated. We can't wait for the workday to end. We watch the clock. We resent any overtime requirements. The exact same pattern is exhibited in childhood educated. Consider how motivated children are when they have chosen their own projects. Then they are alert. They're absorbed, they're inquisitive, they're persevering. The distinction between work and play dissolves. Homework becomes home play. Now, everyone says that they want their children to grow up to be able to lead independent lives, to pursue their self-chosen careers passionately. But that aspiration does not fit with the traditional practices of education that teaches children, above all, to follow instructions without questioning the why. So what kind of education will empower young people for self-chosen careers that are passionately pursued? It has to be one that from the very beginning encourages self-chosen options and a resolute commitment to chosen projects. When children make that self-investment, homework then becomes a natural extension of their schoolwork, as they want to pursue their projects as much as they judge necessary. They are also learning that life is about making choices, finding out what they really enjoy, and following through. And again, by stark contrast, what kind of education is going to prepare students only for order following and for self-stultifying jobs? Well, it's going to be one in which rigidly defined school projects are assigned by the authorities. When kids do the schoolwork, primarily because they have been told to do so, then homework just becomes merely an additional imposition. Kids are then also learning a lesson. Life is about doing tasks, whether they like it or not, and following orders. Now, in those latter, more authoritarian systems, most of the children will accept and they will go along. They will learn it. They will automate it. Hopefully, grudgingly, they are doing so. But to the extent that they do so, they are letting subside their potential for a life fully lived. And unfortunately, that's the way it is for most kids. They get ground down. Only a few will fight to preserve their potential for self-actualization by rebelling. Sometimes, and unfortunately frequently, particularly as middle school and teen years go along, they will rebel obnoxiously because they're still kids, but they're rebelling against the teachers, the parents, and other perceived representatives of the system. And the system does seem like a dictatorial imposition on these normally or attempted normally developing human beings. So we teachers, parents, educators, we should listen carefully and we should read between the lines, so to speak, when our kids start saying self-assertive things like, "You're not the boss of me." And we should reply, "Damn straight, kid, you are the boss of your own life. And our job as adults, including adults who are running the schools, is to help you become better at being the boss of your own life."